Hi, everybody, and welcome to the SSPI video stream of the impact of the COVID-19 epidemic on the space and satellite industry. My name is Arnie Christensen. I am the VP of Aero Service Delivery for SES Satellites. I'm also a member of the SSPI Mid-Atlantic chapter. For those of you that are not familiar with SSPI, Space and Satellites International, we are the industry's largest cross-disciplinary network of individuals and companies in the space industry. SSPI is where people of space and satellite do business, from new hires to seasoned executives, and from startups on the launch pad to mature companies with billions in revenue. The space and satellite business has never seen a time of greater experimentation and disruption than we're seeing today. And SSPI is in the middle of that, helping to fuel investment for transformation. But SSPI's main mission are the people of the space industry. From young people seeking a career path to industry veterans with wisdom to share, SSPI connects them all. And we help to bring new people into the industry through our STEM Scholarship Fund. We also make a case for space and satellite. So talent, investment, and opportunity flow to industries that make a difference. SSPI is the only organization that promotes the enormous value of space and satellite through dramatic stories of our technologies and companies. Those stories inspire, they help justify investment, and they give a reason to care about our services and products in the space industry. The stories we tell and the people we serve inspire the growth of a $1 trillion and growing $1 trillion space industry. So today's panel is about one of the major unforeseen disruptions that we've seen in the last few months, the COVID virus, and how it has impacted the space industry as a whole. We're going to talk today with our panel about the impact across the entire chain in space and satellite, from launch and ops through the supply chain down through market trends. We have a very distinguished panel that I'm going to introduce to you in just a few minutes here. But before we get to that, I want to thank, first and foremost, Communications Concepts for putting together the video streaming service that we're using today. So thank you very much to that group. And the ground rules for today. We will be conducting kind of 3 presentations with our 3 panelists. Each panelist will take about 10 to 15 minutes to present their ideas on the COVID impacts and what the new normal may be for the industry. During that time, I'd encourage all of you to type in some questions. We have my colleague Velva, who is monitoring the question and answers. Our questions, and we will answer those questions at the end of the presentations, about 10, 15 minutes at the end of the presentation. So give us your questions, and we'll devote some time to that at the end. And if you do ask a question, I ask you include your name, your job title, any relevant information about yourself. So I'm going to go through and do a really short introduction to all of our panelists here, and I think you should be probably seeing them pop up on the screen in just a second. And I'd encourage you to go to the SSPI website, www.sspi.org, to learn a little bit more about these fine folks. Our first panelist today is David Little, who's the president of Little International Group and president and CEO of the Diondo Company. And by the way, I'm shortening these in the interest of time, so I hopefully don't cut out anything super important as I read these bios. David's an entrepreneur with roots stemming from his creative broadcasting background. He's originally an on-air sports personality. David's 30-year satellite careers encompass management or sales roles with companies in the transportable uplink and remote production industry, satellite operators such as GTE, SpaceNet, and ComSat, teleport operators Veristar and USCI, and manufacturers such as Comtech, EF Data, RevGo, and Holkirk, the antenna manufacturer. David has been part of executive teams leading companies globally and within North America, with an emphasis on products to DTH providers, cable programmers, managed service providers, and live sports producers. David also oversaw several companies' U.S. government business and organizations at Comtech, EF Data, and Ultisat. David also continues his love of televised sports and as a play-by-play announcer for many high school football, basketball, and baseball games for several programming services. So welcome, David. Thank you very much. I'm going to go through the other panelists here, and then we'll kick right back to you and start your presentation. Our second panelist today is Brad Grady from NSR. Brad has been involved in the satellite communications industry since 2005, joining NSR in 2010. He's the principal analyst for mobility markets focused on commercial and government SATCOM markets. In that role, he leads NSR's research on anything that moves, and that's in quotation. So if it moves, that is Brad's specialty. Aeronautical and land mobile opportunities. He also authors NSR's maritime SATCOM markets, energy SATCOM markets, and government and military satellite communications. Regularly provides his insights and analysis to NSR's single client consulting practice and is also a regular contributor to leading industry publications and forums. Before joining NSR, Brad served as a Sustainable Development Projects Coordinator intern with the Global VSAT Forum, where he regularly worked with the GVF Secretariat and the Regulatory Working Group. Brad holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Maryland, College Park, where his research focused on renewable alternative energies, information communication technologies, and satellite communications industry. He works with NSR's Washington, D.C. office and with his wife, and lives in D.C. with his wife, daughter, and 2 dogs. Our final panelist of the day is Jing Li. She's the Senior Analyst of Corporate Strategy and Development at SES, the world's largest satellite operator. Jing provides senior management with key insights in a wide variety of critical business issues. She specializes in corporate strategic planning, competitive strategy, mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, business and customer intelligence, spectrum policy, and other regulatory affairs. Through numerous cross-functional projects, most recently the U.S. C-band spectrum clearing, she's demonstrated an ability to consistently bring different perspectives and stakeholders together to deliver business value. Prior to joining SES in 2017, Jing served as the principal market intelligence analyst at Intelsat, where she delivered valuable market insights and competitive intelligence for CapEx planning, product and business development, sales, and other areas. Jing holds an MA in International Economic Affairs with a High Achievement Fellowship from the George Washington University and a specialization in business strategy from the University of Virginia. She's currently a level 3 candidate in the Chartered Financial Analyst program. So thank you and welcome again to all of our panelists today. Really looking forward to what they all have to say. And without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to David Little, who will get us kicked off. And take it away, David.
Hey, David. I think your mic's muted.
Oh, there we go. All right, so let's try that again. So again, 4 major areas that I want to focus on. Mobility, which includes commercial aviation and the cruise ship industry. Second is oil and gas energy vertical. And then third is the, I would say, over-leveraged satellite space players, managed service providers, satellite operators, new LEO entrants. And then finally is a bit about the supply chain side. That includes companies that are in the waveform, RF manufacturers, antenna manufacturers, system integrators, teleport operators, and field service companies. So first off, the travel industry. As we all know, the commercial aviation industry has been severely crippled with this. 2/3 of all planes worldwide are still grounded. There's a reported $880 billion loss from a financial perspective for the commercial aviation industry. And there, depending on the countries, you have different rules and regulations. There's travel restrictions as to where they can fly. I see in Portugal where EasyJet is going to begin flying to 4 cities only within Portugal. There's not a whole lot of cross international, even throughout the EU, flights still going on today. And it's a very difficult time. How that affects our industry is we have the in-flight entertainment companies that are providing Wi-Fi as well as on this aircraft itself, operations networks for the companies. Those companies are not getting paid by the airline industry. It further flows down by the fact that they are then going to their satellite operators and the teleport operators of the world that are managing their networks and hosting their platforms and saying, we need you to reallocate, or we need to renegotiate our contracts. Or in some cases, they're calling out a force majeure clause and simply not paying. And it really has an effect because the people they are not paying are then having to further look down the chain and do the same thing to their suppliers and vendors. So it's a very difficult time from that aspect of it. And quite honestly, if you're looking at forecasts, we really don't see that industry beginning to travel en masse until sometime in 2021. And think about it from an individual standpoint. We all as human beings have to be able to get over the psychological hurdle of taking public transportation or maybe our own car to an airport, but then being at an airport with thousands of people, mostly strangers who we don't know. And we're going to have to get past that hurdle in order to really move this thing forward, because if we as individuals are not willing to fly, the airlines are going to remain grounded, and it just further hurts the industry. The cruise ship industry, of course, they were a bellwether for watching the COVID impact grow literally on board ships. And there has been a CDC no sail rules that is still in effect. I believe the first cruise that I've heard that is going is a Royal Caribbean cruise to China, which is a July timeframe. And then you're saying some other operators who are saying that they're going to have travel starting sometime in August. But for the most part, what we're hearing is that it is going to be, again, probably 2021 before the cruise ship industry begins to really come into full effect and start back to getting ships under sail at sea. Once again, there are companies such as Speedcast and Global Eagle Entertainment who they provide the managed service piece of that. And there are subcomponents to their service. Again, there are field service reps who go on board a cruise ship when it's in port. Maybe they're needing to change an LMB. Maybe there's a problem with a modem. Whatever the issue is, they're going on, maybe it could just be an upgrade, but they're having to go on when that cruise ship is in port. And there's companies that, again, are being affected. So they're having to furlough folks. So it's this dynamic of this whole trickle-down effect that we continue to see that is going to take some time for recovery. You do have companies on the manufacturing side, again, as we've talked about that effect, but there are some companies that are willing to take some risk. These are calculated gambles at this point, where they are looking to actually stockpile some equipment. And it really is a smart risk, in my personal opinion, as there will be a time when the industries will come back. But what we've seen from the supply chain aspect is that the delay in some of the supply chain for different parts coming out of China, for instance, has made the delivery time cycles go from a 10 to 12 week period up to a 14 to 16 week period for many of the RF and again on some of the waveforms. The oil and gas market is another place that is affected. Once again, if we are not traveling, if cruise ships are sitting docked in port somewhere, that means they are not burning our fossil fuels. And that industry has seen the oil prices drop due to failed agreements on production cuts, and the need for chemical and refined products has slowed from industrial slowdowns and travel restrictions related to COVID. We've seen the price of crude has teetered down into the low teens. It's now, I think today I saw, is depending on which index you're looking towards, it's between $36 and $40 a barrel. And it's still not enough. You're seeing a lot of production. I think the rig count has fallen from about 2,200 rigs in April of 2019. In April of 2020, that rig count was 1,514. And that number has continued to decrease as we've gone down. Now, we've even seen some upticks in stock prices. To me, that's a buy and sell scenario where people are being able to get in on some news, buy when the price is down, and then selling at the higher end of that. But again, you have many companies in our industry who have made their bread and butter for many years, being the managed service provider to oil rig platforms, both on land and, of course, in places like the North Sea and Gulf of Mexico, Middle East and Africa and such. And they, too, are having to do furloughs. They're doing cuts. And there is a gigantic effect in that particular industry. They are a large purchaser of RF and modem gear to service that industry. And again, that effect is having that they're not getting paid. They don't have the dollars coming in, and therefore they're not spending those dollars. So it's just a dramatic effect that continues to occur within. And then again, the fourth thing that we really wanted to talk about is the softening of the financial markets, which has led to some issues. And of course, we've seen bankruptcy. Speedcast has declared bankruptcy, Intelsat, OneWeb, Phasor. And at least for the first three, they are attributing it to COVID. And I think many of you out there would say, well, there's a potential that they were heading in that direction anyhow. But COVID really has pushed that even further. Again, you have companies that are really heavily dependent on the cruise ship and the aeronautical industries. And I know, satellite operators are touting 20% or so of their sales of transponder space are now geared towards the mobility market. And they're having to take a hit on that as well. So it really has contributed all the way around. And then again, once again, you get into this flow down effect. You're having teleport operators who are being asked to reduce their costs or to forgive or to renegotiate, which in effect causes them to reduce pay, have layoffs, furloughs. They also are then not buying equipment. They're not buying new RF. They're not building new antenna systems. And it just continues to trickle down. It's a difficult time for us as an industry. And the thing we can all do is to support each of our friends, colleagues, businesses that we do business with in the industry. And hopefully this thing will buoy back and make a nice comeback sometime in 2021. But it's some tough sailing ahead of us. With that, I would like to introduce Brad Grady. Thank you. Sorry, Brad. Brad Grady, who again is with NSR. Brad, take it away.
Great. Thanks, David. So my name is Brad Grady. I'm a principal analyst here at Northern Sky Research based in Washington, D.C., Upper Montgomery County to be exact. So it's great to be here. If I can get the slides up, we can walk through a few of the things that NSR has seen and we've focused on over the past couple of months here since that's come in. If we want to look at the next slide. Three kind of big themes, I think, that we've seen coming on. Obviously, there's the COVID dip. As kind of David talked about, there's lots of reasons to be very pessimistic or feel some pain across all sectors of the satellite industry and all parts of the value chain. But come up two other kind of big themes that were kind of going on already. Exits and bankruptcies. Some of that accelerated by kind of the financial disruption of COVID-19. Others, it was kind of a convenient thing to point to, and a kind of a period of, quote, painful transition. So LeoSat, OneWeb, Intelsat, Speedcast, Phasor, all victims of kind of the accelerated financial crunch that COVID-19 brought into the industry. Are there others out there? We probably haven't seen the last of kind of what's to come. There are still places, at least in the United States, thankfully maybe not around DC, Maryland, Virginia area, but Arizona just registered some of its highest case counts today. So there's still probably more disruption to happen. But underwriting all of this has just been this period of painful transition, especially at the satellite operator level. Sorry to beat up our SES folks here a little bit, of this migration from video to data markets and kind of all of that stuff that's been brought about of changing satellite infrastructure, changing investment cases, changing how people are approaching the satellite industry. And that's really left one question of maybe two questions. Are we looking at more vertical or horizontal M&A? That's kind of a question I get almost every conversation I have with folks these days. Is this a time for some consolidation to happen? Probably. And what kind of new infrastructure is really needed to capture new opportunities? I think David went into some of the great challenges of deploying infrastructure today. You can't physically get on sites at a teleport to install new hubs and new infrastructure. People that manufacture antennas are probably realizing social distancing has an impact on their manufacturing throughput and capabilities. Shipping is, I don't know about you, but I mean, every time I order something from Amazon, that actually seems to get here a lot quicker than they say. But there's still lots of challenges of kind of doing that stuff, and borders are still closed. There's still lots of challenges about international travel and international movement. And I think everyone in the satellite sector, especially in DC, can attest we're a very international industry. We want to look at the next slide. So we asked kind of NSR's clients right after satellite, so satellite 2020, between March 30th and April 1st, kind of what they saw and what they were feeling for the impacts of COVID-19. And if we look at the next slide, this is a couple of questions that I want to kind of present to everybody. One of them was kind of rank your views on the impact of COVID-19 to the satellite and space value chain over the next 12 months. So where you were in the value chain, kind of where do you think is going to feel the most impact? Suffice to say, almost every sector felt some impact. The Earth observation folks maybe saw a little bit more of a positive things because you probably can configure pattern of life analysis, all those other kinds of interesting statistics that people are doing with Earth observation analytics these days has provided some little positive brights. Satellite service providers, depending on kind of your exposure to the government markets, saw a little bit of an increase probably early on of disaster relief, disaster management, emergency response, people gearing up for those types of activities, but everyone else has kind of felt that pressure. And if you didn't feel it at first, you're probably feeling it now, or you're probably going to feel it a little bit later on. Now, we asked the next question to our end users and our client base was, what was the impact on the value chain? And suffice it to say, like kind of David said, air on cruise mobility markets, which is kind of where I spend the bulk of my time, some significant impacts there. Other mobilities, so these are kind of land mobile, government, et cetera. A little split between whether or not they saw significant impacts or low to low impacts. But on the positive side, there's still some positive areas. Media and broadcast probably got a little bit more of a, life in the sails from all this, as we've all kind of been tuned in and looking at, increasing our media consumption. Government and military to kind of prepare for disaster response, kind of capability building. Those things, consumer broadband, huge kind of boost in that thing, and then cellular backhaul, depending on what part of the world you are and their uptake of satellite services. So there are some bright spots to kind of look and navigate you around. With every crisis, there's always opportunity. If we want to look at the next slide, we can look at kind of asking our next question here of what was the kind of the length of time that people expected to have for the impact. So if we want to look at slide number 5 here, almost 80% said at least 6 months. And even more people kind of skewed towards the 12 plus months. And then there was still about 18% of people that was in that kind of 18 plus months. So, if you can imagine, if you're heavily exposed to the cruise ship sector, especially the cruise ship sector, in the Caribbean, the CDC, no sail orders, all those other kinds of things, significant impacts. As far as I know, the first cruise happened yesterday for Hurtigruten out of Norway. So they were still operating as a ferry service, kind of moving locals between ports to ports. They finally opened up their first cruise, I think either yesterday or the day before, for Norwegian citizens only to travel on the Norwegian forwards as a cruise. So there are areas that haven't been as impacted that are still kind of doing the social distancing. The vessels are operating at 50% capacity. They have a very slow phasing approach, taking it very cautiously. But if that's not where you're at, if you're heavily reliant on Caribbean cruise activity or Alaskan bound cruises, you're still going to feel that pressure. We want to look at the next slide. And that kind of gets to, the two big elephants in the room, especially in my world, is the aeronautical markets facing kind of that COVID-19 slump, but the long-term fundamentals still do remain solid. So free Wi-Fi, aeronautical connectivity, as soon as we all start traveling, whenever that happens, those trends will continue. We can probably argue that the need for connectivity is even higher in kind of a, during and post COVID-19 scenario. But, there's no reason to beat around the bush. The slump is very hard and very deep, especially in this year. GoGo, Global Eagle, all of the aeronautical service providers have really felt the pressure. Because when the planes aren't flying, they're on the ground, nobody's doing it, they turn the keys off, turn the engines off, it's done. Now, on the maritime side, on the other hand, these are still vessels, there's still people on board these vessels. They're more likely than not away from port. So they're still kind of operating as a ship. They still have people that are making sure they don't run into things. The engines are still running, et cetera. So even if they're not engaged in their primary mission, like oil and gas or merchant maritime or cruise ships, cruise passenger activities, there's still crew on board. There's still ship functions that need to do. So they can't entirely turn off. So overall, maritime SATCOM, kind of in our latest report that we published in May, is still buoyed by that broadband demand. There are challenges installing and deploying new broadband connectivity. So if you're familiar with that market, the conversion between kind of the MSS broadband sector to the VSAT adoption, that maybe is hit a couple of stumbling blocks. But overall, those vessels have not significantly turned off, have not significantly kind of fallen out of the market. And if we want to look at the next slide, you can check out kind of NSR's website. We have a series of stuff that we call the NSR bottom line. I just published one yesterday, actually, on the cruise ship sector. But a lot of my colleagues that focus on consumer backhaul and space situational awareness and video have all gone into kind of that COVID-19 impact. So if you haven't checked it out, or if you're not subscribed to NSR's series of bottom line posts, I'd suggest you check it out. There's some good stuff in there. And then the last slide, and I think with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jingli, and she'll wrap it up.
Thanks, Brady. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to your last presentation. So if you do have a cup of drink next to you, feel free to take a sip. Very honored to be here with you today. Thank you, Arnie, and thank you, Valva, for handling all the questions behind the scene. Hope everyone is still doing well. For those who don't know me, I'm Jing from the Corporate Strategy and Marketing Intelligence team at SES. I'm based in DC, so hopefully we'll have plenty of opportunities to see you face-to-face when everything is settled during our future events. Our first two panelists, David and Brad, give a very good overview of the things that caused by COVID-19 and the trickle-down effect along the traditional satellite value chain here. My presentation today will focus on the larger ecosystem, the medium and longer term impact, so 2 to 5 year time frame from here, and some thoughts on the implications for our members at SSPI Mid-Atlantic chapter. So if we can go to the next slide, it'd be great. So here, what do I mean by the larger ecosystem? As you can see from the graphic on this page in the middle we have the traditional satellite value chain, all the way from satellite manufacturers to launch providers to ground equipment makers to satellite operators and to satellite service providers. So all the names that you're familiar with, from Boeing to Speedcast. On the periphery, there are a few other major influential groups of stakeholders. Here, they include, first off, the government and NGOs, big tech, and professional services providers here, such as law firms and investment banks. Now, COVID, for the longer and medium-term impact drivers, I grouped them into 4 buckets. You can see them in the dark navy blue boxes at the top. That is capital market, supply chain, long-term technology and usage shift, as well as regulatory policy update. These forces, whether on a standalone basis or combined, are literally affecting every player in our larger ecosystem here. For instance, like our previous two panelists just discussed, access to the capital market or the lack of has essentially forced a few players into bankruptcy. Disruptions of the supply chain, on the other hand, is delaying launches, manufacturing, service delivery, so companies may have to rethink about how they reconfigure them to reduce or mitigate future business risks. Consumers, especially those in the capital market, in the developed market, are accelerating their cord cutting because there is no live sports or live events. On the other hand, the demand for fixed broadband has skyrocketed because of the lockdown. And finally, governments in the world are launching unprecedented fiscal packages to help the economy. According to the IMF, as of May 20th, countries around the world have deployed $9 trillion to shore up the economy and to help people and companies to get through the crisis. Among the G20 countries, their fiscal support accounts for 4.5% of GDP on average. This is larger than those during the global financial crisis 12 years ago. Governments are also thinking about creative ways to bridging the digital divide, which has proved to be extremely consequential during the lockdown, and jog for power to support their domestic, strategically relevant industries, including space and satellites. Can we go to the next slide? Yes. So as The Economist magazine put it eloquently in their March 26th issue, downturns are capitalism's sorting mechanism, revealing weak business models and stressed balance sheet. As our entire ecosystem rapidly adapted to this new reality in terms of market, competition, and ways of doing business, where do we go from here? A few outcomes are likely to emerge as we come out on the other side. So first, industry consolidation, like Brad just pointed out, it can be in the forms of horizontal merger, vertical merger, or in any other alternative forms such as strategic partnerships. So you can see here, I put a few names out there: Intelsat, Eutelsat, OneWeb in the upstream, Speedcast, GoGo, and Global Eagle in the downstream. This list is by no means exhaustive, as literally every player in the industry, especially those among satellite operators and satellite services providers, rethink about their market prioritization and in which part of the value chain that they are trying to play here. And second, a new class of competition. In a lot of cases, these companies are either have very deep pockets themselves or are supported by national governments here. First, SpaceX, very well connected with the current administration. With around 500 Starlink LEO satellites in orbit, the company was able to influence the FCC thinking about the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction. As a result, SpaceX could get billings from the government to partially finance its constellation build-out. I'll touch upon this point in the next section. And Amazon, none of us probably would have survived the lockdown without either Amazon Prime or Amazon Fresh. The company surprisingly has not submitted any updated NGSL filing during the latest FCC NGSL processing round. But we know that it has been ramping up hiring pretty aggressively, especially for critical functions like spectrum and regulatory affairs. And then we have the Chinese government. Recently, the Chinese government has included satellite broadband for the first time in its new infrastructure stimulus plan, which could total $1.4 trillion through 2025. In addition to the state-backed LEO projects, such as Hongyan and Hongyun, there are a few other private ones backed by local billionaires, such as the founder of Geely, who owns Geely, of course, and Volvo, Lotus, and roughly a 10% stake in Daimler, as well as the founder of Xiaomi, a rapidly growing consumer electronics giant. Whether any of these LEO projects will eventually take off and become financially viable businesses still remains to be seen. But the vast influence of these companies and their backers is something that we simply cannot ignore. Third, we have cloud as an imperative. The disruption caused by COVID-19 has further underscored the importance of cloud as an infrastructure, as a platform, as a software, and as a services. Many organizations have accelerated their cloud adoption because of remote working and increased video conferencing. Interestingly, cloud adoption is intertwined further with 5G deployment, especially here in the US. Microsoft saw this opportunity. So after COVID, Microsoft announced 2 acquisitions in this area, namely Affirmed and Metaswitch Networks. The goal of these 2 acquisitions is to leverage their cloud-native software to help the American MNOs to accelerate 5G deployment. As a market segment, satellite company also has an important role to play here. Last year, SES, Intelsat, and Viasat all formed strategic partnerships with Microsoft Azure, directly connecting our ground stations with Microsoft Cloud Services via direct link. There is more for us to do to further integrate our satellite networks with the global cloud infrastructure. In addition, companies can also go to market together, especially to drive further adoption in segments like mobility, where satellite is often the only viable solution for cloud scale services. And this is the more intuitive one, business operations. Many companies have realized the cost-saving benefit of having remote employees, combined with the increased pressure due to revenue drop as a result of COVID. They are offering more flexible working from home arrangements. Business travel is also likely to be reduced, as we all have found out that even state leaders, top executives, and even board members can have meaningful conversations virtually. And finally, corporate social responsibility and employee well-being. In extraordinary times like this, people, companies, and the societies are looking for the greater good and a sense of purpose. Organizations will invariably devote more resources to make a more positive impact on their local community and to make sure that their employees stay strong both physically and mentally. In sum, the future will be a lined-up giants with strong cloud-native capabilities, delivering their products and services efficiently and with a focus on CSR. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, now just a few quick words on the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF, since this is a hot topic recently. In January, the FCC adopted RDOF Report and Order, which established the framework for RDOF through 2 reverse auctions. Last week, the FCC finalized the auction rules for Phase 1 auction, namely Auction 904. Currently, this auction is scheduled to start in October. RDOF is simply the world's largest universal service fund. It will offer more than $20 billion in subsidies to bring broadband to millions of unserved and underserved homes and small businesses in the US. Phase 1 auction will offer up to $16 billion to connect the unconnected 6 million homes, and the rest, along with any unused portion from Phase 1, will go to Phase 2. So why is this important to us? Well, you probably have guessed right. Satellite is often the last resort for connectivity in difficult and remote locations. The business case there doesn't always close, nevertheless. This is where the governments decide to come in because connectivity is increasingly seen as a basic human right. This combined with the bandwidth productivity gains from newer satellites could really make a difference. Therefore, it has become a hot topic for many operators, including SpaceX, Viasat, Hughes, EchoStar, Telesat, just to name a few. One of the contentious points here is around the low latency, defined as sub 100 millisecond by the FCC. Whether anybody is eligible to bid in the low latency tier, which has a 40% weight, is going to affect the amount of money that they will get from the auction. Simply put, the higher the latency, the lower the subsidy, all else being equal. Obviously, GEO and MEO cannot meet the 100 millisecond requirement due to physics. And after quite a few rounds of debate, the FCC last week finally opened the door to allow LEO operators to bid in the low latency tier if they can prove it. So it's good news for the likes of SpaceX. Viasat also modified its NGSO constellation filing from MEO to LEO for exactly the same purpose. It will be intriguing to see how things evolve here, because a few $billion is not a small amount, especially for our industry. This combined with the ongoing C-band proceeding, which will give 5 operators a combined incentive payment of $9.7 billion, could significantly change the competitive landscape in our satellite industry. So this is all exciting, but what does it mean for our members at SSPI MA? I believe it's all good. DC is going to become an increasingly important location for space and satellites. Without too much travel, probably for quite a period of time, we'll have the opportunity to build a stronger local community together. So with that, hopefully we can make a difference together. On this positive note, I'll now hand back to Arnie and Volva. Thank you very much, and cheers.
Thanks, Jing, and thanks everybody on the panel for those presentations. We didn't get a whole bunch of questions on the actual feed, but we do have a few, and also lucky for everybody else, we came stacked with our own to keep things rolling here. So I want to start with the first question from Mark Feelig, who's watching us on the stream. His question relates to the C-band auction on the lower 200 megahertz of that C-band spectrum. I don't know who's best to answer this. Maybe I'll start with Brad on this. Is there any impact that we see in the industry on that auction of that lower 200 megahertz?
It's a good question. So I'll be honest, I'm not the right person at NSR to answer that. But I think what we are seeing is on the financial side that there's a lot at stake for that auction to go off and for the proceeds of that auction to be funneled back into the satellite operator landscape. And as the satellite operators are healthy, then the entire option, entire value chain changes. But if you have detailed questions, email me and I'll send it to the right person at NSR.
Maybe Brad, I can give it a shot. Yeah.
Jing, can you speak to that maybe? That would be good.
Yeah, so I think it's not just the lower 200 megahertz, but the lower 300 megahertz, 280 plus 20 megahertz guard band. So far, we haven't seen any material impact on the schedule of that auction. So that is still set on, I believe it's December the 8th.
Okay, thanks.
Since C-band and 5G deployment are so important, that the FCC is really trying to do everything they can to make sure that it happens on time.
Got it. Okay. David Little, you had actually a direct question you wanted to ask Brad. If you want to go ahead and ask that question.
Yeah, this is actually for Jing, not Brad. Within your presentation, Gene, you talked about the cloud service provider aspect. And one of the things that I've always believed is that the teleport industry, they really were the first data centers. They do the same thing data centers do, which is provide rack space and connectivity and cooling and great electric and low electric rates in a lot of cases where we have rural teleports. Do you think that the teleport operator side is in position to potentially become that edge data center that the industry needs?
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And not just for communications, but also for Earth observations and IoT. I totally believe that there is a huge role for teleport operators to play here. But of course, the problem for them is how to scale. As we all know that cloud is quite a capital intensive industry. Maybe we'll ride on somebody else's platform to essentially let them use our shared infrastructure. I think this is also the general trend among the telecom industry as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Another question we had here was actually from Brad, and this one is also, I think, directed at Jing. I'm not in a position to answer this question myself because we might be getting into some strategy stuff here. But are the new satellites going to be wide beam? As far as for COVID on new satellite procurement on GEO, wide beam or spot beam satellites, what's the impact to any C-band payloads on those?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure, but I would think that they're just the regular wide beam C-band satellites that is best positioned to distribute programming here throughout the CONUS. And timing is of the essence, so we want to make sure that we make simple satellites so that we can make them and launch them on time to meet the deadline and to get the incentive payment.
So that was sort of my thought as well. Simplicity is important, and turning them around quickly is a better wide beam architecture there. So that was a good question, Brad. Thank you very much. A couple more here. We've still got about 10, 15 minutes left. So this is sort of a big lob softball question for everybody. But it does sort of put everyone on the spot, and I'd like everyone to answer it kind of in order here. If you had to pick like the one single largest impact you've seen over the last 3 months to either your area of the industry in general, if you just had to pick one, what would it be? David, if you want to start, and then we'll go to Brad and then Jing.
For me, it's no doubt it's the aeronautical industry. The shutdown and the grounding of planes has had a tremendous impact from a financial perspective on so many players in our industry. So to me, it's the aeronautical piece.
Brad?
Yeah, and I'll kind of echo that a little bit. Aeronautical definitely has been hit the most, I think we've seen. But being that I'm in that professional services segment, I think the other part is the trade show organizers. So some of us were at Satellite, others didn't, but everything else since then in the entire sector has been canceled. It's been great that we've been doing all these virtual things, but I think eventually we're going to hit that point where, hey, it's in order to close a deal, you still have to talk to people face to face and do that kind of human interaction.
Jing?
Yeah, for me, it's not so much about the actual business or the work. It's actually about how we work together. So as I mentioned, many organizations have accelerated their cloud adoption because of COVID-19. ICS is a case example. Right after our global work from home policy has been put into place, we accelerated the deployment of Microsoft Teams throughout the organization. And we found it fascinating. It's really a truly equalizer across the organization, making it very easy for people to stay open and transparent and real time in terms of cross-regional collaboration. And in difficult times like this, we all now realize that how important it is to have deep human connections with each other. So I found this part really exciting, actually.
Hey, Arnie.
That's thanks for those answers, because I was actually expecting everybody to say Aero. So I'm glad that everyone sort of different answer there. Seeing as that's sort of my bread and butter here as well. We see these trends in that particular industry certainly took a hit, but we also see some promising, behaviors coming out of COVID there of a recovery. So that's good. But speaking of Aero, and this is not just Aero, but it, I guess, goes for any mobility segment, does fewer aircraft or fewer ships flying necessarily mean less bandwidth? Is there maybe a case to be made for the people who are flying, the smaller population will just eat up more bandwidth and have a better experience overall on those aircraft or ships? Brad, I don't know what you think about that possibility.
Yeah. So for right now, the answer is yes. The people that are traveling are getting the full bandwidth that's provisioned for that aircraft. So they're having awesome experiences right now. To the point where, we, in some of our kind of practices, we've been, talking to airlines, and they've had to ramp back some of their future deployment plans because they were running up against the limit of their onboard services and onboard infrastructure. And that was going to be like a critical next step of how, they were going to move to the next level of deploy new things. And now that nobody's traveling and those kinds of things, that they've been able to come back under the capabilities of their infrastructure. So yeah, definitely in the cruise ship sector, particularly, I think you have two scenarios that are very viable. One is, bandwidth demand is increasing. It always increases. I mean, it's kind of, I think, fallacious maybe to go down the same house, like your value of your house always increases, and we saw where that happens, but bandwidth is probably a little bit different. But on cruise ships, yeah, I think we can say that even if you have 50% less people, they're probably going to demand 50% more bandwidth than what they did before. So the net on a per ship basis stays level. And the cruise ship companies themselves probably have an incentive to get all of their vessels out as soon as possible and at least operate at break even. Because that's going to help them kind of get back to service, start stemming the tide of their huge cash burn that they're going through right now. I think, Carnival was burning $4 billion in the second quarter. So there's huge amounts of cash burn going on right now, and they need to get their ships out. They need to get some money in. And I think what we will see is that even with social distance, even with the reduced capacity on fewer people, that bandwidth demand is going to be the same. And then once more and more people travel, we're going to get back up to kind of that, exponential growth curve for bandwidth demand.
This is a two-part question that has to do sort of with pipeline spacecraft launches and the ability of companies to finance these new technologies. Jing had brought up, the 4.5% of GDP has been spent on recovery by governments on just financial recovery. How does that impact, the financial markets, the ability of companies to get credit and actually launch new spacecraft and/or consider new constellations at all? David, I don't know if you've got some insight on that, and I think this might be a round-robin question as well.
Yeah, well, from my aspect of this, I deal with some private equity firms who are looking at some roll-up opportunities because they feel that it is a capital-intensive business, and there are many companies out there that are strained. And if it is a new launch scenario, look, the LEO industry is very capital-intensive. And we saw what happened when SoftBank decided to move their money away from OneWeb. It was a crippling effect. But I think that there are other equity partners out there who are looking at this as an opportunity as they see the potential down the road for a growth economic engine for their own funds, for their own selves, whatever. So yeah, I think there's a good possibility there that the financial markets could actually take a play here in a capital intensive environment that the SATCOM world lives in.
Brad, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely challenges. There's no doubt. Even before all this stuff, I think, last year there was, lots of conversations around roll-up opportunities and M&A. I think that's probably accelerated. People that still are well capitalized are looking for opportunities to acquire companies that aren't so well capitalized. But I think the other interesting thing, when we kind of look forward towards technology timelines and end user roadmaps, has this new wave of flat panel antennas and LEO things where you're going to have this weird period of, I'll go back to like the airline customer that was starting to run up to the top end of their onboard infrastructure. They had to make an investment decision of what do we invest in, because LEO's not quite ready, flat panel antennas aren't quite there yet. Are we going to invest in some interim technology before we make the next leap? Well, now that bandwidth demand has been coming down, what is that comeback period? We say it's kind of about 3 years. Well, that sort of lines up with when some of these new flat panel antennas technologies are going to come online, when LEO is, going to be here. I mean, SpaceX and Starlink continues to launch. mPOWER, I assume, is still kind of turning it on track, and other plans are still there. So we might end up emerging from all of this in a little bit better position on the end user front, because they're not going to be adopting an interim technology. They're going to be leapfrogging from kind of a wide beam geo infrastructure or maybe an HTS infrastructure to a LEO, flat panel, multi-beam, multi-orbit.
That's interesting. That's an interesting insight about the leapfrogging. I hadn't thought of that. Jing, do you have any thoughts on that cost of financing and money? And
yeah, I think the business cases for commercial communication satellites is still going to be very challenging, especially in this post-COVID environment where we don't know for sure when the demand will pick up back again. But if somebody is underwriting your satellite procurement, whether it's a government or whether it's spectrum buyers in the case of the C-band clearing project, this is a no-brainer. So for instance, SES and Intelsat combined will order or have ordered 10 satellites for the C-band spectrum clearing here in the US. And governments around the world, as they think through how they can bridge the digital divide quickly, maybe they will provide subsidies for satellite players, whether it's in LEO, MEO, or GEO, to provide connectivity services there. That will make a difference.
excellent, thanks. So I'm going to have one more question here, and then we'll sort of adjourn. So the last question I have is, it's not meant to sound cynical, but it was brought up on one of the presentations, at least peripherally. How much are we seeing in this industry of kind of, well, it's COVID's fault, as more or less a bit of an excuse to slow things down and not maybe move as quickly on some incentives or on some projects? And do we see that becoming a problem down the line? And again, round robin here, we'll start with Dave on that one. David.
Well, again, you've had at least 3 companies that have said that they're going into bankruptcy because of COVID. I can tell you that knowing some of these companies, they were heading in that direction regardless. They were in very difficult situations. And I think, again, the aeronautical players are going to find themselves in very difficult situations as we go forward. They maybe can, again, point to COVID as the crippling effect that it's had as the major reason, but they weren't strong to begin with. A lot of these guys were having financial difficulties. It's a tough business case to make for this aeronautical side of it. And again, you have to be well-heeled with a lot of dollars in your pocket to make it go forward. I think Brad said it best. It is nice to be able to say that this has been the benefactor out of this, but it's a difficult environment. I don't think COVID had everything to do with it. Let's just put it that way.
Brad?
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe I want to expand the focus a little bit, because we're in DC and we're focused on SSPI people stuff. And maybe cynically ask the question of, because we're all working from home, has that changed the labor pool and our, where people are hiring and where they're hiring from? DC and kind of the DC Maryland region has been, for lack of a better term, a pretty good hotspot for satellite technology and satellite jobs. It's pretty common that you would run into somebody anywhere here that that works in the space sector. And is that going to change going forward? I mean, obviously, I think David said it best, that it's nice to have something to blame that's not just you. Not just you made a bad business choice, or you had a questionable business plan, or it was very capital intensive and XYZW. But I wonder kind of the trickle down impacts of things, as we start to emerge and start to go forward, of, has the labor market for satellite jobs changed in the DC region? Now all of a sudden, are we going to go back to work? Are people okay working from home? Are companies okay working from home? Is that going to change, the DC landscape of commercial real estate and those kinds of practices and all that kind of stuff? So I wonder a little bit more about our regional, like kind of the little regional bubble that we've lived in for satellite jobs and sectors, and are we going to face more kind of extra regional competition?
Jing, any thoughts on COVID as sort of an excuse to explain challenges in the industry?
I would echo what David just put it out there. And I want to repeat what I just said during my presentation because I really like it. Downturns are capitalism's sorting mechanism, revealing weak business models and stressed balance sheet. This is exactly what we have seen in our industry in the case of some stressed balance sheet and some problematic business models in terms of the our service providers. What I want to add on to that is that as we come out on the other side, those problems will be fixed, hopefully, and this industry will come out on the other side stronger and healthier.
That's a great way to end our presentation today. It's a little bit of an uplifting message there from Jing and our panel. So I want to thank everybody for joining us that's on the stream and for your questions. I also want to thank again David, Brad, and Jing. And then once again, I also want to thank the Communications Concepts team for helping us put this together. One thing we've learned today is that COVID has forced us to do this type of event for SSPI, and we've shown that we can pull it off. So we will probably be doing more of these. And in the meantime, if you are not a member or are not part of SSPI or don't know a whole lot about it, please reach out to myself, anyone on the panel, or anyone in the SSPI organization. We'd love to have you join up. And with that, I'm going to say goodnight. Everyone can go have another beer. David, Brad, Jing, thank you very much. And we will see you next time. Thanks again.
Cheers.
See you, Arnie. Bye.